Welcome to this video. I'm going to show you here how to get set up with GitHub and Git and on Visual Studio Code. Connect it to your GitHub so you can move a repository back and forth. So this is university's virtual machine, which hopefully you've got access to. The first thing I would do is ensure that you sign up for the GitHub Student Developer Pack. This will give you, if you sign up with your Hallam account, this will give you a GitHub account, and you'll have a GitHub password so that you can then sign in to GitHub. Once you've done that, you will then be able to sign in. So first time you go to GitHub, it should prompt you to sign in. I've already signed in, so it's taken me to the repositories here. Now, so you'll have an overview, something like that, with no repositories in it. If you want to build a new repo repository, you can go up to your repositories, and then in here we can click on new, and we'll create ourselves a new repo. So we'll just call this web dev demo, and then we can leave all the other defaults. We'll leave it on public for now, and then we'll create the repository. So this is creating a repo repository on the GitHub cloud for us that we'll be able to connect to via Visual Studio Code. There's various kind of command line Git commands that we can use here. Well, maybe I'll look at those later, but for now all I'm going to do is just create a new file, and in here we'll just call this index.html, and then we could add a very basic bit of HTML. Okay, this is awful HTML, but we'll get rid of this later on. Okay, so largely relevant what you put in there, but put in a basic bit of HTML. I shall scroll down and I'll commit what's known as a commit. I'll call this first commit, and then we'll commit that. So what that is in effect doing is saving that file to this repository. So I can see that file there now committed to this repo. Right, so that's a basic repo setup. You'll be able to later on fork repositories from myself and other people and bring them into your own repos, but for now let's just minimize that, and we'll bring Visual Studio Code into play. Okay, so here's Visual Studio Code, which you're hopefully getting reasonably familiar with now. Just tidy this up a little bit. So when you first open up Visual Studio Code, you are going to it's going to appear a bit like that. So previously we've just been dragging files in to work with them, but now we're going to clone that Git repository onto our machine here, so that we can edit the files in a more friendly environment, and then we can put them back from our local repos, it's called the remote repo on GitHub. So first of all, I'm going to clone Git repository. It'll ask me for the name of a Git repo, and that would be this thing here. So it would be your username and then the name you've given the repo. So you don't want to be any further down like that. You want to be at this level here. So I'll copy that repo name. I can then go in here, hit return, hit enter, and all it's asking now is where you would like to store this local copy that you're creating. So I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm on a virtual machine here, so it's nice and clean, and I'll create a new folder called web dev, and then in there I'll create another folder called git demo, and I'll select that as my repository location, and then it'll go away, and it's cloned it. So it didn't take very long at all because it was only that basic little index.html page. I'll open that up. I'll trust myself, and you can see there is the index page now that we created from earlier. Right, great. So let's say that I make some changes to that. So I'm just going to delete what was in there because that was pretty rubbish, and I'll use the emit trick with an exclamation mark, hit tab, and we've got a much more realistic bit of HTML in there now, and I'll put in a little h1 and we'll say hello git. Right, so I'll save that, and what you'll notice is when I save that, this source control icon indicates there's a change with a little 1 in it. So let me click on that, and this will take us through the various stages of source control. So at the moment we've got an uncommitted change, which is what it's picked up. You can have multiple changes in there, which you'll certainly have later on. So what I'm going to do, this plus here will state what's known as stage that change. So it's moved it to what I like to think of as kind of a departure lounge, ready to be committed. And then committing it will commit it to my local repository, because what we've got is a local copy of this little website running now on the virtual machine. So I'll call this my first, or let's call it Visual Studio Code commit, so we can clearly see it when we roll it through to the repo. And then I'll commit that, and then it says, okay, you need to make sure you've configured your user name and user email in Git. So let me cancel that, and I'll go to open this thing called terminal. So terminal is the command line, it's the PowerShell, and we go up, and it's built into Visual Studio Code, so we go up to terminal, select new terminal, and it will appear down here. And then there's a couple of commands that we need to type in here. So first of all, we can check that Git is running, because Git was already installed as part of Visual Studio Code. You can check that by typing in Git version. You can see the Git version there. And then I'm going to type in git config and then user.name, and then you can type in the username that you set up on Visual Studio Code. Sorry, the username that you set up on GitHub. So in my case, that would be must be built. Okay, well, that'll be your username that you set up previously when you went through the GitHub Starter Pack. So that'll be my username, and then we need to do git config user email, and then in there you can enter your email that you used to set up with GitHub. So I'll just type mine in there, and that goes in speech marks. Just get rid of this for a second so you can see it a bit better. There you go. So you've got git config username, and then your username you set up on GitHub, and then git config user email, and then your email. It won't give you any response to that, but you can check that it is there, because if you type in git config username, you can do this email as well, you should see that your username will appear. Right, so we've now put our GitHub username and email in. You'll see in a second it will prompt us for our password as well. So let me go back to the source control, and now I should be able to commit that. And it has allowed me to commit it. But what it's done is it's committed it to the local copy of the repository. The one over here on GitHub is still not up to date. You can still see it's got the basic HTML in there. So I need to do what's known as sync that now across. So let me put a message in again. Always put a message in. So I'll call this Visual Studio Code commit, and click the little tick there. And also here we've got nothing to commit at the moment, so because we've committed to local, but what we do need to do is now is sync. So if I click on sync changes, and you can do it down here as well. You can see there's one change to push, as it says, and there isn't any to pull. So there's one change to push to what's called the origin main. That's the remote repository. So let's click sync changes, and it's saying that this will pull and push, so you could bring changes down as well as push them up. So I'll click OK, and at this point it should know that I wasn't actually logged in. So now we did sign in via the browser a second ago before. If you weren't signed in by the browser, it would take you away to sign in via the browser, but I can click on there, and because I'm already signed in, it should then move the files across in a second. There you go. You see it's done it. It's synced it. So if I go back to GitHub here, that's how it signed me in. So I'll just close that down. And now if I refresh this view, we can see we've got the recent commit message. It was done 2 minutes ago, and when I open that file up, we can see the new version of the file. Okay, now once you've done one change like that, if I went back and in my pages here, let's say I created a new folder and I called it CSS, and in there I created a new file and I called it main.css, and let's say I put in a CSS rule for setting a font. So let's use the old favourite, and then I'll save that, and let me link these two together. So I'll put a link tag in and we'll link to that style sheet. So I've made some basic style sheet additions. If I go over here now, see we've got 2 source control changes. I can stage them individually all together, so I'll stage both of those. Let's call this adding CSS, commit it. So that's committed it to my local repo, so my local repository on the virtual machine is currently up to date. But if I do want to put those back across to the GitHub repo, I can sync them. I'm already logged in, and it will just do it without any further requirement to log in. Go back to GitHub here on the web and refresh it, and I can now see that I've got the link there to my style sheet, and you can see I've got this additional folder with the files in there. Okay, that's working with Git and GitHub. We'll do that in the labs. Hopefully that has been a useful video for you.